Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. Joining me today is Melanie Lockert. Melanie is the author of the book, Dear Debt, based on her longstanding blog. She's also the podcast host of Mental Health and Wealth. Melanie was successful in paying off $81,000 in student loan debt, and she has chronicled her journey on her blog and in her book. Today, our focus in our conversation will be all about debt and how to manage it. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hi, Melanie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I am so excited to speak with you today all about money and debt reduction and how as women we can look at debt maybe differently than before we listen to the podcast today. But in the intro, I told a little bit about you, but I also want to give you a few minutes to kind of share with us just a little bit of your journey and what you do today. And then we're going to jump in with all the questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. And we're talking about my favorite topics: women, debt reduction, money, mental health, so many different things that I'm passionate about. So today I'm currently a personal finance writer and author of the book, Dear Debt. I'm a podcaster at Mental Health and Wealth Show. And I also founded a women in money retreat called Lola Retreat, which has been on hiatus during the pandemic. But, all of this really started close to 9 years ago, January 2013, I started a blog called Dear Debt because I was severely depressed about my student loan debt. All of 2012, I had been trying to find jobs in the arts. I had all of this student loan debt from my master's degree from NYU. In total, I borrowed $81,000 in student loan debt. 23,000 of that came from my undergrad in theater, and 58,000 of that came from NYU in performance studies. And I had wanted to be a professor originally and, get my PhD and work in academia. And then halfway through my program, I realized that that was not the path for me. And so, I ended up just graduating with a master's and had all of this debt and had to kind of reshift and reshape my life because suddenly I had all of the student loan debt. And, I think that we are fed this story that if you work hard, you go to a good school, that you'll be able to find a good job and pay back your debt. And that was not the experience that I had. And it's really humbling to, have a certain life and a certain career and then think that you're making the right steps and then finding yourself in a worse financial situation. So, by the time I graduated NYU, I had my master's, I was 27, and I was more broke than when I was 20. And, a lot of my friends were getting married and buying houses and having kids and having all these financial milestones. And then suddenly I just felt basically like a broke college student all over again. And the blog was really me trying to take back control over my life because I felt out of control in the way that it affected my mental health because I was so anxious about owing so much money. I felt so much shame and guilt for not being able to pay it back, and for going to a fancy private school after people told me, maybe I shouldn't. And, all the feelings that come along with debt. And who knew that at the time that blog would literally change my life? I mean, it led to, like I said, a freelance writing career in finance today, my own podcast, a book, my own event. And as my friends always tell me, like, Melanie, you turned your pain into your passion. And I'm so excited that I can share my story today because I know, intimately what it's like to struggle with debt and the feelings of shame and anxiety and depression that come along with it. And I understand that it's a very important topic for women because women are in a very particular time in history right now where they're earning more money, they're getting more educated, We have different relational dynamics. We have more choices than ever. And with all of that comes, new territory that we haven't really explored.
I remember, let's see, it would have been back in 2003, I think it was. And I've shared this story on my podcast with my origin story and all that, but I was sitting at our kitchen table and I was finishing the taxes for the prior year. It was like March. It was, right there trying to get all the tax information over to the accountant from the prior year. And I had left my tech career and had come home to start a business and raise my family. And at the bottom of my profit and loss statement, I had a negative number. And the whole reason that I came home to start my business, well, number one, I left a 6-figure income to come home to raise my kids. But number two, I was trying to start a business to bring some money into the house to alleviate some of the pain of trying to take care of everything, off my husband's shoulders. And so not only did I not do that, but as my story goes, I was, not showing up for soccer games, or I was too busy working for other people and doing other things, yet I wasn't getting paid and I had a negative. And so if you have a negative, it means that the money came from somewhere, which means my poor husband who worked all day gave money or, put money into my business so that I could do things for other people and not even be able to take care of my own family. And that is the day. Mine was in 2003. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table and thinking just how miserable I was. I was embarrassed. I was mortified. I was hurt. I felt broken. And at the same time, I remember thinking, I'm just a failure, right? And I called my husband, Melanie, and I said, I was expecting him to be a little bit of a girlfriend, and he wasn't. And I was like, I've lost money. I've got a negative on the P&L. And he was like, you need to get it together. He's like, you're a smart woman. You have done all these things. You understand money. You've run $1 million budgets. What are you doing? And I realized that I had given up my own control of my money for the payoff of pleasing other people or doing what was expected, or that, there was a different payoff to what I was doing other than hard cash. And I had to have a very kind of clear conversation with myself. It's funny. One of the things I have mentioned that I like to be, I've got like 5 things that I want to be as a leader. And one of them is active listener. And, I've been learning over the years, Melanie, I also have to listen to myself. And I had stopped listening to me in some of those dealings to make everybody else happy. And I'm not even a pleaser. But I remembered kind of the way you had that moment that was like, I've got to change this. I don't want to live under this anymore. Like, it's too weighty. I remember that exact same moment. I know that moment for me. And what it did was when I shifted and changed and got it under control the way that you had, written a book and done your things. That's exactly what I did is I used mine and turned around and created signature courses. And I've gone out on, teaching circuits and speaking circuits. And that's the whole reason I have the podcast. It's the whole reason I'm a business coach, because people don't have to live like that. Like that doesn't have to be the end of our financial story. And so it's just so neat to hear yours where our stories aren't exactly the same, but debt is debt, whether it's your personal life that's in debt or whether it's your business life that's in debt. Both of them bring those same feelings.
Yeah, it's such an emotional process. And thank you so much for sharing more of your story. I love hearing about these moments that, really catalyze us to make change in our lives that can be lasting and really help others,
So I loved your book, by the way, Dear Debt. I want to say a couple of things. Number one, it's written very succinctly. It's very engaging. It's easy to grasp and understand. It's not preachy. I found it very tactical in what you delivered and explained. And I've got some questions from it just so that we can unpack it a little bit. But I've already thought of a couple of my kids' friends who are in debt from college, from going, of sending it to them and going, this is a really good book and could really help you. But before we jump into that, I do have one question for you.
Yeah.
I've thought about it 2 or 3 times. I think you made a comment in the book that being under that amount of debt, you were acutely aware of it. Like it was in your vision. It wasn't off to the side. It was like in front of you. And it felt like this thing that you just kept running into. Yet you had some peer group and others that you had seen, I'm sure, along the way. They were like, it's debt, whatever, or it's student debt. It doesn't matter. In your research and your study and your working and talking about this topic, do you have any insight into what makes some people feel the pain of debt and others be able to ignore it? Because our family I couldn't ignore it. We couldn't ignore it. And I mean, it was constantly like somebody beating on us. Even our sons are that same way now. They're like, oh my gosh, I owe a little bit of money. I need to get that cleaned up. But I got plenty of other friends who were like, whatever. I mean, they're just racking up debt on top of debt, bad habit on top of bad habit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And, this is not scientific. This is based on my personal experience and my kind of chatting with other people. But from what I understand is that it really comes down to risk tolerance. So, we talk a lot about risk tolerance as it relates to investing, but I think it's really important to have this conversation with debt because I know that I'm extremely risk averse. I don't like,
Me too.
People's money. I don't like feeling like people have something over my head. And I think it really has to do with, our risk tolerance, how we were raised, kind of our money mindset, what we saw growing up. I kind of was acutely aware that money was finite and that, I've heard of my parents' struggles in the past with money and knowing how much I made before going to grad school. I mean, the most I had ever earned at that point was $38,000. So to suddenly be owing, more than double that, I mean, that was also like a wake up call too, to be like, oh my gosh, even if I just put all of my income towards debt for 2 years, I still wouldn't pay this off. And it also kind of related to my mental health issues. And what I mean by that is, I have had clinical depression and anxiety. And I think, when you're paying off debt, you are literally paying for your past. All of those monthly payments are for something that's already happened. And so when you're trying to move forward and be successful and be happy and reach the next goal, you're literally tethered to the past with this monthly payment. And because interest is ballooning so quickly, it feels like an impossible beast to master. And so for me, it was this acute awareness of how much it was growing and how difficult it would be to pay back given my current financial circumstances. And also the fact that I would never feel truly free until I paid it off, because as long as I was making money, a part of that money was owed to someone else. And I think, for people that have a higher risk tolerance and they're just like, oh, debt is debt. I mean, maybe they had a different upbringing. Maybe they earn more money. They're not as sensitive as I am. I'm also a very sensitive person. I think there are so many different factors, but it is interesting to me because I still have friends to this day who, they're not fazed by debt. They just think of it as another bill. But for someone like me, I felt tortured by it. And I know not everyone feels that way, but that's the way I felt. And I felt like no one was talking about it. And so creating my blog at least created this safe space where I could talk about this. And I found a community of people who said, I feel the same way too, which was so powerful.
Yeah, I have had, I think, the same experiences with you. Like you said, they're not scientific, but it is what I've run into as well. I love the line in your book. It was one of the first lines in there where I think you said to yourself, it's time to break up with debt. And Mike Michalowicz in the book Profit First, one of the things that he says when we're talking about debt is you've got to love saving more than spending. Like we have to twist our mind to say our whole life can't just be spend, spend, spend. And even when I work with companies, the first thing I do is go look at their balance sheet and I look at their profit and loss. And so some people tend to think, well, Michele only works in finances. And my answer to them is always kind of what alluded to what you were saying, Melanie. I'm going to that because that's what shows me where they're spending their money and what they owe. all it is showing me all the decisions they've already made. And if we don't like the numbers that we see or the places that those numbers show up, right? If we wish they had shown up in profit instead of expenses, we have to change the story. We have to change the actions. We have to change the choices. And you had to do a lot of course correction, right? To be able to pay off $81,000 of debt when that's not what you were making in a yearly salary. Just share with everybody how quickly you said you wanted to pay it off, because you gave yourself a pretty aggressive goal.
Yeah. So I just want to, be transparent about this. So the unsexy version is that I paid it off in 9.5 years. And that's because, I went to undergrad and grad school at 2 different times. The first 5 years, I just paid the minimum on my undergrad debt. And then I went to grad school. And then when I graduated from grad school, after making, minimum payments for 5 years, I had $68,000 left still. And I paid that off in 4.5 years. So that's kind of like the sexier version. So There's been a lot of, articles written about my story, and, depending on, who writes it and how they want to frame it, like there's the sexy version, the unsexy version. And I just want to share both because I want to be transparent that it wasn't overnight, but yes, I do want to also say that, paying off $68,000 in 4.5 years was a lot. And it was interesting because when I started my blog, you can read the very cringy and awful first post on Dear Debt about how I gave myself a timeline of paying off my debt in 4 years. When I started the blog, I had $57,000 left. And I was making $12 an hour at a temp job. And so I had no idea how in the heck I was going to pay off $57,000 in 4 years. But I was like, I just need a crazy audacious goal to put out there in the universe, because this is driving me, miserable. And I'm so deeply unhappy and I need to make a change. And it's so interesting what happens when you put a crazy goal like that online, because then I had these supporters cheering me on. Then I realized 6 months to a year later that, I can turn my blogging skills into freelance opportunities as a writer for other blogs and for other finance companies. And that's the career I have to this day. I mean, that is really what helped me become self-employed. And what's interesting is it took me 2 years after graduation to finally find a nonprofit job as a communications and events coordinator, making $31,000. And, when I was really broke, I was making between $16,000 and $20,000. And for context, I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. I was paying $400 in rent because I was living with my then partner in a studio apartment. I did not have a car. I did not have health insurance. And so my expenses were super minimal. But even then, it's like, you realize that frugality hits a plateau very quickly. And I realized with how much debt I owe and how little income I'm making, my only choice really is to earn more money. And so, I finally got that nonprofit job making $31,000. And then at that same time, I realized people were side hustling as a blogger and a writer. And I thought, well, I have a master's degree. I've written papers. Maybe I could do this. And I got my first $25 blog post, and I started, pitching and connecting with other writers. And interestingly enough, a year after getting that nonprofit job, I quit. And my parents were like, "What are you doing? Like, you waited 2 years to get this full-time job with benefits. Like, you're going to quit now?" And I said, "I promise you, I'm going to make more money being self-employed." And that first year, I doubled my income from $30,000 to $60,000. And self-employment for me single-handedly got me out of the low nonprofit pay trap. And, I know a lot of people quit six-figure, very well-paying jobs to go self-employment route. And that's a little more risky. But for me, it was the opposite. It completely opened up a whole new world, making more money, when in the nonprofit world, it's so easy to be capped at, 40,000, 50,000 and never have any chance of earning more. And so for me, it just opened up my financial life. I was able to pay off my debt December 10th, 2015, and, grow my income and grow my business from there. So like I said, creating the blog changed my life, which then turned into writing for others, which then created a self-employment writing career. And, people think, oh, there's no money in writing. Believe you me, there's money in finance writing, especially if you write for some of the fintechs and financial institutions out there. And so that really helped me pay off my debt and completely changed my life. So when people are like, how'd you pay off your debt? I always say two things. I lived in a very low cost of living location and had like almost no expenses, like cut back to the bone. And number two, I doubled my income through self-employment. And that was the biggest key for me to make progress with my debt.
So one of the things that you said in the book, and I marked it as key, was you said having money means having choices. Yes. And to your point, you can only cut back so much. At some point, you do still have to breathe. You do still have to eat. You do still have to have shelter, good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We still need to hit some of those. And so we do need to bring in more money. But, the trap that I see and have also experienced is that we bring in more money, so we go spend more money. Yet what you did was you focused primarily, not to say, and we'll talk about this in a minute, not to say you didn't treat yourself, but you chose that when you made more money, you spent more money, but you spent it on paying down that debt, not in increasing your lifestyle at the very beginning. In a way that, let's say kept up with the money that you were making. You had a plan. I'm a firm believer in we tell our money where to go instead of seeing where it's already gone. And I think that's exactly what you did. You were very intentional with telling your money where to go. It kind of goes back to my tagline, what you own, you can change. And you owned the position you were in, you owned the spending that you had done, and then you chose to own the income you were making and how you spent that income. And you spent it differently than you spent it, the money that you had before, right? So very intentionally to get out. But something I also noticed in your book that I don't know that I had thought about. I totally get it. I understand it. But you called it the stages of debt. And the minute I looked at it, I'm like, that's the freaking stages of grief. She took the stages of grief and showed how working through that debt. And it's so true, Melanie. We go through this, the denial, like, it's not that bad. So I'm not going to worry about that. To, oh my gosh, what have I done? Why did I choose this? Why didn't I listen? Or I'm so mad or angry, or you're mad at the institutions because of, terrible lending practices or whatever it is. And then again, the bargaining and then the depression, which feeds right into the mental health, like all of this does. And then accepting it and making a plan. Sometimes I think too, it's easy as business to not see the debt as personally as if it were personal debt. But it does the same thing that personal debt does. And that's it ties our hands from making other choices because we are still tethered to prior choices.
Totally. Yeah. And, in the book, I definitely talk about how paying off debt is like the 5 stages of grief. And I experienced that very closely, in my own personal story. Like I was in denial at first with how much I owed. I signed up for a mint.com account and saw how much I owed and I deleted my account because it was easier for me to pretend like it didn't exist, But
see, that's what happens with a lot of people that call me when they finally call me to talk about, wanting to grow and scale their business, but either not understanding their financials or having, different financial challenges. Sometimes it's because they looked at it and it was so overwhelming for whatever reason, right? Either the understanding of it, the amount of it, the weight of it, that they took a step back. It's the ostrich. And then they hit this point or hit this wall where they're like, I can't go on like this anymore. Something's got to give. Something's got to change. What was the one? Was there one thing other than it just, that's a high number. I don't want to live under debt. I don't have a lot of risk tolerance. Do you even remember like a moment where you thought, all right, I've gone through all 5 stages. I'm at the acceptance. Get this off of me.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were several different moments that were kind of critical to the story. So the first moment that got me out of denial. So as I mentioned earlier, probably I graduated May 2011, like that first month or two, I created that mint.com account to see how much I owed and to try to get my finances together. Completely panicked and freaked out, and I deleted it. And I tried to, bury my head in the sand. And it wasn't until about December 2011, where my grace period was coming to an end. I still hadn't found a full-time job in New York. I had gone on 30 different interviews, had many second, third, and fourth interviews, so close to getting hired, and then they would go with someone else. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't afford to live in New York anymore while living and paying off student loan debt. And, my partner at the time, was living in Portland. We were doing long distance. And so I kind of realized like maybe now's a good time to go move across the country and have a lower cost of living and to be together. And, while I had romantic influences at the time, I did not want to leave New York yet. I was still very much invested in trying to make my New York life work. And so I felt like I was kind of pushed out of New York without my consent or without wanting to leave. And when you feel like your debt is making your life choices for you instead of you making your life choices for you, that's also a very humbling experience. I would say that was one of the big kind of rip the Band-Aid off moments. I was like, I'm not in denial anymore. Like, this is affecting my life. And then, I had like a mini hopeful phase, like, okay, Portland's going to be cheaper. I'll be a big fish in a small pond. Everything will be great. No, the economy is much smaller in Portland. This was still a few years after the Great Recession. So, jobs weren't, abundant. Mm-hmm. And then in Portland, I only found $10 to $12 an hour temp jobs, and I ended up on food stamps briefly. And so then I just kind of spiraled even further because I was like, this is not what I imagined my life to be after getting my master's degree from NYU. And so, between feeling like I got kicked out of New York, ending up on food stamps, making $10 to $12 an hour, I was just extremely depressed and anxious and felt I can't continue on this way because this is not sustainable. I'm so stressed out. And, I feel like I've just made so many mistakes and I want to course correct.
I can't imagine the weight of all of that. Like you said, it does happen in small stages and bits and pieces, but I'm just amazed that you were able to even still think clearly, because the spiral's real. I mean, it's real for all of us, no matter where we are in it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. You have to really kind of rechannel that energy into something productive. And for me, that was through blogging, because if you don't, it just sits in your nervous system and makes you spiral.
Well, and you mentioned too that you did some counseling, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So important.
When I was in Portland in 2012, I found affordable counseling at the local grad school. So there were graduate counseling programs offering $15 sessions for people. And they were like counselors like one semester away from graduating and getting their certification. So they still needed clinic hours. And because I was on food stamps, I was able to negotiate it down to $5 per session. So that was a great hack for me to get someone to talk to. And while that was helpful, and it definitely helped a little bit, I still kind of was running in circles. And, at the end of my time with that, I kind of realized, okay, this is the main point that's causing me stress is the debt. The only way for me to be free is to pay off the debt. So even though it was helpful, it was limited in its usefulness because I realized I'm still going to feel this way as long as I feel trapped under this debt. And the only way to feel untrapped is to get out of this debt. And so, like I said, I hit my kind of breaking point at the end of 2012. That's when I discovered personal finance blogs and thought, what if I start my own blog and then I share my own story? Because as much as I love all these other blogs that I'm reading, I feel like they're not sharing my story, which is I thought I did everything right by going to a good school, getting the quote good debt for student loan debt. I don't have any, thing to sell. I've never had a spending issue. I have no assets to my name. So I can't just like sell my items and pay off my debt in 6 months. And also this is severely impacting my mental health. And so I thought, maybe I can kind of fill that gap in the personal finance blogging world because I'm not seeing that. And that, showed to be that it was a niche that was required and needed for other people. And people were clamoring to say, I feel the same way too.
Okay, so let's go a bit more tactical with it then, because you mentioned two main philosophies, if you will, of, let's say, debt reduction, paying down your debt in the book. The debt snowball, which we all talk about. I mean, that one people are probably most aware of, but also the debt avalanche. I'm going to give you a minute. Explain what the debt snowball is, and then let's talk about the debt avalanche, just in case these are new terms to anyone.
Yeah, so the debt snowball method is if you have various types of debt, you kind of line them up by the smallest balance, and you focus on paying off the smallest balance first. So this is assuming that you're making minimum payments on all of them, but then any extra money is going towards the smallest balance so you can pay that off first. And this is something that's usually, recommended by Dave Ramsey and other people because it can be very motivating to see the numbers go down quickly when you focus on the smallest balance. The debt avalanche is about focusing on high interest debt first. So if you have, student loans, a car loan, and credit card debt, it's likely the credit card debt has the highest interest, and you want to focus on paying that off first, regardless of the balance, because interest is what makes debt so costly. And so for me, I had graduate plus loans at 6.8 and 7.9%, like 50,000 of that. And then I had my undergrad loans at 2.3%. And so when I did the math, my loans were costing me $11 per day. And when I did that math, I got so angry. I was like, that's a flight from New York to LA once a month. Oh my gosh, I could do so much for $300 a month. And I channeled that anger into paying off my debt because I just realized how much I was paying towards interest. And so for me, the debt avalanche method worked because the math is what motivated me. I think there are no right or wrong answers. I'm a personal finance writer and people love to say, what's the right answer? What I always tell people is the right answer is the one that you're most consistent with. If motivation fuels you, do the debt snowball. If math motivates you, do the debt avalanche. Also in the book, I recommend two other debt payoff options. So number one, pay off the debt that makes you the most angry. So if you have debt from an ex-boyfriend or an ex-spouse or some other traumatic experience and it just makes you angry, pay that off because you will get your peace back faster. And another one that I mentioned in the book is pay the debt off that will give you the most peace at night. What will help you sleep better at night? So, if you owe your parents money or owe a friend money or whatever, and it's causing strain in your life and keeping you up, pay that off too, because your peace is priceless. So I offer those two other repayment strategies as well, because I think they're important in acknowledging the way that debt affects our emotions, our life, and our peace.
I'm glad you mentioned them. I had written them down in my notes to talk about, because I think they actually in some ways will guide the individual to whether they do a snowball or an avalanche method. And the other thing is that's kind of interesting is you don't have to just do one and stay. Like you can switch in the middle if you think, okay, now the endorphins aren't kicking off enough. I'm going to switch because now I'm going to be motivated by math. So it's not always just one way. It's really about staying focused to pay it off.
Exactly.
But that, like I've also worked with quite a few companies where they've had multiple owners and then maybe they've sold the company or an owner had sold their portion or whatever. And that's a debt that most people want to go ahead and pay off as quickly as they can, because otherwise it always feels like that other partner is still somewhat involved. And, so if you were to just even move it back into business from personal, it's the same thing. It's what is it that either makes you feel, like you said, angry or not even peace. Even if you're not angry about it, it just doesn't feel peaceful, or it feels like one of the kind of pictures in my mind, Melanie, when I think of debt sometimes is I think of being in a hot air balloon and you're in it and you are so excited about going up and away and looking over the rooftops and going on this beautiful excursion and, all of the things. The weather is gorgeous, but the people holding the ropes on the ground won't let go. Like nobody will let go. And you're like, please let go. Can somebody cut those ropes? And if you really just could create even a mental image that every time Like you could almost draw this, right? And have a different like tether line and name it as a debt. And every time you do it, you're cutting it. And you're going to see in your mental image when you cut that last rope, that balloon's just going to go. And that's what I think of when I think of being so tied down by debt and not being able to have the freedom to make the choices in your life that you want to make at a time, having to make different choices. And more doesn't mean they're all bad choices, but it's just more limited. It's just not the freedom to holistically choose whatever you want to do in that time frame.
Yeah, totally. I love that imagery.
One of the things that I have shared with my students and coachees and people that I've worked with for years is, and even all the way back to my kids, when I would tell them, you're not your mistakes, or you're not, the worst thing that you've ever done. That's not who you are. It's what you did. It's separate, just the same as you're not your business. Even if I'm self-employed, you're self-employed, I'm not my business, because if my business ceases to exist, I will still be here. Like we're not the same. And I love that because you also said in the book, and if I could just like highlight it and put 14 exclamations behind it, you said in chapter 5, you are not your debt. And I think for anybody who has experienced debt or who is currently maybe under that weight of shame or irritation or frustration or anywhere in the 5 stages of debt right now, I think that's freeing to know we are not our debt. How did you work it out to finally get to that place when it had probably been a bit more consuming at the very beginning of your journey?
Yeah, I realized, so much of the suffering related to debt was this idea that because I was so much in the negative, that my self-worth was in the negative. I had conflated my debt with my self-worth. And I think this happens a lot in our culture. We conflate our self-worth with our net worth. And because I owed so much money and had no assets to my name, I felt little and small and worthless. And, as I was doing some of the money mindset work required to pay off that amount of debt, I realized this thought is not serving me. This thought is not helping me pay back debt. And honestly, just because I'm not working a full-time job or making a great income or able to pay off the debt like I want to, doesn't mean that I'm useless, doesn't mean that I'm worthless, doesn't mean that I suddenly don't have value. I mean, think of all the unemployed people that we've seen, since the pandemic, or people that suddenly have to go on disability. They're not suddenly worthless or, not valuable to society. That's not true at all. But those are the kind of messages that we take in from this productivity hustle culture that's always demanding that we produce more and more and more. And so I had to really separate my self-worth from my financial life and say, I am not my debt. Even if I don't produce anything, even if I don't pay off my debt, even if I don't have a job, I am still worth something because I'm a human being.
Exactly.
And, that's the plain and simple of it. And I know that's overly simplistic, but I think it's an important revelation for people to have, that simply by being alive, you are worth it. And, you don't have to conflate how much value you provide the world with your work or your debt or your financial life. And so, I had seen so many other people also feel low self-esteem because of their debt. And so I just said, you are not your debt. You are not alone. You are not alone. And kind of those are my 2 signature phrases that I've been saying for years and years now. And I still think they're super important even today.
I would totally agree with that. And I do think there's a huge amount of power that you actually took back, right? By realizing that you were separate from those. You do have value and worth simply by being born and by being human. And the rest of it is something that's happened. It's something that can be worked on, worked around, worked through, but it is certainly not to be equated with personal worth or any worth like that. So let's talk about for a minute. You have a couple of really great ideas towards the end of the book. Not that the first part didn't have great ideas, but in a different way, right? But you mentioned something called debt fatigue, and I have seen that as well. It's where you're doing the same thing, you're getting exhausted, you're getting tired, and you feel like every dime is going towards debt fatigue. I know even in Profit First, in that methodology that we use, we talk about debt fatigue and how to reward yourself so that you don't get exhausted or you start having stress and anxiety because you're constantly telling yourself what you cannot do or cannot have, or, or where you cannot go, or all those things. So share a little bit about what you did to overcome debt fatigue, because I thought some of the things that you offered and suggested in the book were just really great.
Yeah, I think, overcoming debt fatigue requires you to set milestones for yourself that, can keep you inspired during the process. So for me, I would say, after making $1,000 payment, I would, be able to go to a coffee shop and have a nice drink. After $5,000, I might go to the massage school and get a $30 massage. After $10,000 payoff, I might go for a day trip. So having these reward systems in place so that I'm honoring the journey and still having some fun, because I think debt fatigue can happen because you're just so focused on paying off the debt that it feels really not fun. So you have to incorporate some more fun throughout the journey to stay motivated as well. And I think that's just part of the process,
I would agree. In Profit First, some people always get twisted up by the title, thinking that we're robbing the company of profit. But really what it's doing is it's creating a rhythm of creating and managing profit within the company so that the company can be sustainable. And when we have debt in a company, one of the things that we do is we go through that same process of like, here's our profit distribution, but instead of distributing it to people, we distribute it to pay off debt so that we understand, number one, that we already have good habits in place of saving, but then we recognize acutely that until we pay off that debt, that additional savings doesn't get to come home with us. But we do make an allowance for some amount of that money to be able to be used to celebrate, whether it's to have a pizza party with the team or whether it's to do something small just in recognition. So it's about getting in those good habits, finding ways to reduce waste and expense, but then at the same time, being able to treat yourself. It's so easy, I think, Melanie, I don't know if you've run into this in your work as well, but I've seen some people that have a higher tolerance for debt in business than they do at home, but they don't always realize that it's tying them down the same way until it ties them down. And so just understanding that the principles that I share over on, purely the business side, I don't really get into a lot of people's personal finances. We do look at it and go, okay, if we can put these things in practice here, it certainly translates to personal, and vice versa. All of the things that you've talked about from a personal budget, personal debt standpoint translates into the business. And that's why these are so intertwined. I remember watching or reading, I don't know what it was. I was looking at something a couple of months ago, and it was talking about one of the number one leading causes of divorce was actually, I would have thought before I read it, infidelity. But the number one cause was financial issues. And I was like, oh my gosh, marriages break up more over finances than over an infidelity. And that one caught my attention. So it is seriously a big deal if you think about, because it influences so much of what we do the day to day, how we think, how we cope, what we do, our mental health, our energy, all of it is tied to how we use money as a resource, whether we are making it work for us or whether we're working for it. Debt kind of feels like we're working for it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, finances is a huge pain point for couples, especially if they're on different pages. And, to your point, I definitely think people can kind of, quote, justify debt a little bit more in a business because it's a, quote, investment. And while I understand that logic to an extent, I think it can be easy to get carried away when, we don't have a plan to get that return on investment.
I would agree with that. Something else that I thought about when you were talking a minute ago about treating yourself and finding ways to not get burned out on it. It's what we do when we do weight loss journey, right? We're like, oh, when I lose X amount of weight, or, I'm going to go on this vacation, I'm going to buy these cute jeans or whatever. Like, we set goals. It's the same thing here. And you mentioned something about recognizing your spending triggers, which is the same thing when we're going through a struggle with eating, that we're told, think about your triggers. What are your stress triggers that cause you to eat when you're not hungry? So it's interesting how there are triggers that make us feel this urge or this need and desire to act a certain way or to do a certain thing. And they're not always for our health and our benefit. What were some of your spending triggers?
Two of my top spending triggers, which still persist today, are hunger and exhaustion. So if I'm hungry or extremely tired, I will just throw money at the problem, and suddenly I'm spending, $20 to $40 on a venti coffee and a lunch or some sugary treat or whatever. And I just realized, if I'm not getting adequate sleep or if I'm not properly nourished, then I just spend money without care because I'm trying to fix the problem. But then I overcompensate by, buying all these things and, trying to solve the problem, where it's much easier to say, you know what, let's try to get a good night's of sleep. Let's make sure to have snacks on hand. Now whenever I travel or if I know I'm going to have a long day, I bring bananas and granola bars and protein shakes and things that I know that can help me stay nourished and also not fall into that trap. But it took a while to be aware of that. And I think awareness really is the first stage. And so realize, when are you spending more money than usual when it seems like something's kind of guiding you there without like you wanting to do that per se. And I think that's a good kind of indicator of what that trigger might be. And then try to reverse engineer it. How can you prevent that from happening? And for me, that's why it's super important for me to try to get adequate sleep and then also just have snacks on hand, because I know I don't make the best financial choices when I'm extremely hungry and tired. And I talked to this therapist on my podcast, the Mental Health and Wealth Show, and she said something that has really stuck with me. And she said, adults are not so different from toddlers. We're really just advanced chemistry sets. And when things are off, we're just going back to kind of our base urges and needs. And so really just think of yourself as these advanced chemistry sets and what your needs are. And once you have those basic needs, then you can make better, more optimal decisions.
It's funny that I think we used to always hear, don't ever go to the grocery store when you're hungry. And it's true, because you pick up, trash food and throw it all. My husband say, oops, look, those 4 things of Oreos fell into our basket. I wonder how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
The same kind of
You're
thing.
Like, why is my grocery bill double?
That's right. He would be like, the kids have left home. Why are we paying more? But I also know one of the things, like you had said, kind of the reverse engineering it. When we did some analysis of our own home spending, we realized that a large portion of our personal income was spent on eating out. And I think a lot of busy families and homes do that. And when we started having conversations about the body's digestion of food, where does it all go? Right. At the end of the day, we were like, look how much we just literally flushed down the toilet. Sounds gross, but it's true. So then what we started doing was, at the end of the day, if we had not planned a meal and we had not thought in advance and kind of done some menu prep and that kind of thing, instead of just jumping up to go out and grab something, we start this conversation, not the whole, where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? Not that one. That happens too. But this one is, are you craving anything? Is there anything that you think that you want so badly that you're willing to pay for it? And when we ask it that way, Melanie, both of us have been like, I'm not really craving anything. So then when we don't really want anything, there's nothing that we're just dying to have. Like there's not this urgent need. It's just more sustenance that we're looking for. It changes the way we look at paying for that sustenance, because now going out to get, a $50 steak is not what we really want, because we're not even that hungry and don't even know what we want. And that's when we end up back in the kitchen, either making a sandwich, scrambling eggs, grabbing some soup, or like you said, granola or something, because there's nothing that is that important. And so it just kind of puts it in perspective. Are you willing to spend X amount of dollars to go eat that when you're not even hungry and not sure what you want? And when we just kind of turn the question around, we both are like, yeah, I'm not really want to spend my money that way. I don't really want to spend my money that way. But if we're just looking at solving the urgent need of eating and not thinking about the money and what it cost and what else we're not going to be able to do later, we would just jump up and run out and go grab something.
Yeah, I love that reframe. I think that's so useful.
It has been for us. And so now, but what it also does is when we are craving something, it's like we've given ourselves permission to go enjoy it, because we don't mind spending the money, because now it's what we want. We're looking forward to it. We're not just at the end of the day going somewhere just to eat so that we can go home and watch a Netflix show and go to bed. Do you know what I mean? It becomes an experience. It becomes something that we are planning for and excited about. And it sounds crazy, but the food tastes better when we go looking for it like that than when we were just solving an urge that we had in the moment. So that's kind of one of our mind tricks that have helped us not spend money when we don't need to. And, it sounds cliche and I talk about it all the time, but creating a budget has been huge too. And so we've given ourselves permission to spend within certain allotments, because it also keeps us on the path for how we want to spend our personal money and our personal life with other things that we're saving for or that we want to do the same way that we would do in a business.
I love that.
So as we wrap up today, Melanie, is there anything else that you can think that you would love to leave our listeners with about their mental health, about getting out of debt, changing their mindset, anything that we haven't covered that you think could be instrumental in helping them move that needle forward just a little bit?
Yeah, I think, focus on the things that you can control and the things that bring you joy. I think right now we're seeing so much change in the world. There's high inflation, there's high gas prices, wages have been stagnant for many years. There are a lot of things that are kind of hurting our finances that are not in our control. And I want people to use that in the way of like, don't think that this is just your problem if you're not making all of the numbers work perfectly, but there are many different systemic issues that are making it difficult. But what can you focus on? And where can you grow your income? Where can you lower your expenses? And what can you do to bring more joy and passion in your life and earn more money? Because if you can tie some of your passion to making money, it'll be easier to make money as well.
Oh, I love that. So where are you hanging out online, Melanie? Where can people find you?
People can find me at Melanie Lockert on Twitter and Instagram, and also check out my podcast, The Mental Health and Wealth Show. And as you mentioned, you can read my book, Dear Debt, and get that on Amazon.
That sounds awesome. I highly recommend the book. Quick, easy read, but just full of actionable information. And Melanie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Melanie, for sharing today. I love the honest approach to money management and debt reduction that you shared. If you're a successful business owner and you want to kick that debt to the curb, apply for a discovery call and let's make a plan to tackle your debt head on. Choose to be profitable by paying off debt, because profit doesn't happen by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.